All right, so the next form is going to be the Ontario 271 listing agreement, seller designated representation agreement, authority to offer for sale. So this is the listing agreement. This is the form that you will use every time you do a listing, and it is the one that needs to be filled out correctly. So let's go through this in detail. First part, this is a multiple listing service agreement or an exclusive listing agreement. So depending on if you're going to do it exclusively or on MLS, you get your sellers to initial here in order to get them to agree whether it's going to be on MLS or not. Brokerage, Red and White Realty, our address, the phone number, seller's name, and seller's name. Now, because we built this in the WebKit, it's already showing up. If it didn't, then you'd have to fill this in. Designated representative is your name. And it says the designated representative will be providing services and representation to the seller, and the brokerage provides services but not representation. So that's the designation, or the differentiation is that the designated rep is the one who's actually providing representation. It is consideration of the listing for sale known as the street address here. And then the seller hereby gives the listing brokerage the exclusive and irrevocable right to act as the seller's agent, starting on, so you would put a time here, AM, let's say 9 a.m., on the whatever date that you're starting it, and finishing on this date whenever you're finishing it. Now, these dates that came in here were from when we filled in the information in the WebKit, so make sure that you fill them in if they're not there. Then we put the price. This price again comes from our when we did the actual wizard, we put in the price. That's why it's showing up here. Otherwise, you would put in the price and it would show up here. So if I change this, for instance, it will show a different number here. But let's go back and make that 500 as per the WebKit. Here we talk about schedules. Are you adding a Schedule B or not? We don't have a Schedule B at red and white. We've changed that to the disclosure form, so you don't have to put a Schedule B. And here it says the seller represents and warrants that the seller is not a party to any other listing agreement for the property or agreement to pay commission to any other real estate brokerage for the sale of property. So your sellers would initial here and say, yeah, you're the only person that's listing this property. Skip down to commission. Commission always gets people mixed up, so I'm going to explain to you. The first section here is the total commission. So the total would be 5% or 4%, whatever it is, but that's the total commission. And then down here is the commission that you're giving the cooperating brokerage. So let's say 2%. So 4% of the sale of the property or total commission for any valid offer. So you could also say you're going to charge $5,000. And that would be the total commission. And then down here, you could say we're going to charge $2,500 back for the cooperating brokerage. So depending on what you put here, it's total and what you're providing to the cooperating. Total, what you're providing to the cooperating. So let's get rid of that one and put in 4% here. And put in 2% here. That's what you're giving to co-op. You're keeping 2 for yourself. And then it goes on to say the seller further agrees to pay such commission as calculated if an agreement to purchase agreed or accepted by the seller or anyone on the seller's behalf within, let's say, 120 days after the expiration of the listing or the holdover period, so long as such agreement is with anyone who was introduced to the property from any source whatsoever during the listing period or shown the property during the listing period. So this basically says if you've been working with someone, you show them the property, or someone has shown your property and then your listing expires, then the seller should be paying that commission out to that agent. But it goes on to say that if, however, the offer for the purchase of the property is pursuant to a new agreement in writing to pay commission to another registered real estate brokerage, the seller's liability for commission shall be reduced by the amount paid by the seller under the new agreement. So basically, it says that if a buyer comes through your property, then the listing it gets expired and then it gets listed by another brokerage, they only have to pay the difference between the two, and usually it's going to be the same amount of commission, so there would be no offset to the other buyer agent. They wouldn't have to pay anything. Here's an interesting sentence here, and it says that the seller further agrees to pay such commission as calculated above, even if the transaction contemplated by an agreement to purchase agreed to or accepted by the seller or anyone on the seller's behalf is not completed. If such non-completion is owing or attributable to the seller's default or neglect, said commission to be payable on the date set for completion of the purchase of the property. So if the seller doesn't close for whatever reason, they still owe commission. Any deposit in respect of any agreement where the transaction has been completed shall first be applied to reduce the commission payable. Should such amounts paid to the listing brokerage from the deposit or by the seller's solicitor not be sufficient, the seller shall be liable to pay to the listing brokerage on demand any deficiency in commission and taxes owing on such commission. Basically, it says that the deposit pays the commission. That tends not to happen, but it does say that in here. Skip through and let's look at all the things that we need to make sure. So, initials for the listing brokerage, initials for the seller. In the event that this agreement expires or is canceled or otherwise terminated and the property is not sold, the seller, by initialing, does or does not consent to other real estate board members to contact the seller. We always initial does not. We don't want the sellers bugged after it's been canceled. Then we go down and we sign it here, date it, and put your name. And the sellers put their signature, the date, and their information here. If there's spousal consent, the undersigned spouse of the seller hereby consents to the listing of the property herein pursuant to the provisions of the Family Law Act and hereby agrees to execute all necessary or incidental documents to further any transaction provided for herein. So this is just spousal consent for them to sign. They've signed up here as a seller. It's not necessary to sign down here. Declaration of insurance, the salesperson, and you put your name here and what you are, salesperson or broker of record, hereby declares that he or she is insured as required by TRESA, and they sign. And then the seller acknowledges that the understands the terms agreement, has received a copy of this agreement on, so you put the date, and then the seller signs it. We have a Schedule A in here because Rico said we need to tell the seller what it is that we're doing for them as part of our services. So you can see that the first thing is C point 6 of the listing agreement. If we scroll back to point 6, point 6 talks about the things we do in marketing. Seller agrees to allow the listing brokerage to show and permit prospective buyers to fully inspect the property during reasonable hours, and the seller gives the listing brokerage the sole and exclusive right to place a for sale and sold signs upon the property. Seller consents to the listing brokerage, including information and advertising that may identify the property. The seller further agrees that the listing brokerage shall have sole and exclusive authority to make all advertising decisions relating to the marketing of the property for sale during the listing period. The seller agrees that the listing brokerage will not be held liable in any manner whatsoever for any acts or omissions with respect to advertising by the listing brokerage or any other party, other than by the listing brokerage's gross negligent or willful act. The seller acknowledges the brokerage in accordance with the MLS rules and regulations and the Canadian Real Estate Association Realtor Code of Ethics. This listing shall be within 3 days of public marketing placed on an MLS system for cooperation with other realtors. So basically says right here that if you start to publicly market this property, it has to be on the MLS. That is a new rule. If we go down further into Schedule A, it says, will we be installing a lockbox? Yes or no? Will we be doing photos of the property? Yes or no? Compensation does not change in a multiple representation situation, so that is up to you. If you decide that if you get into multiple rep, you want to change your compensation, you can remove this and change it at will. It is hereby mutually agreed and understood that the brokerage is not providing representation to the client. The designated representative identified in this agreement is solely responsible for representing the best interests of the client. Then it talks about the brokerage responsibilities because they are not the designated rep, and it's more about confidentiality information, treating interests of clients with. Basically, it talks about what the brokerage's role are, what the designated representative responsibilities are, and they should follow professional services to the seller. Property valuation and consultation, prepare the listing agreement and other listing documents, list the property on MLS, install a for sale sign, electronic lockbox, and creation of a property feature sheet. If you don't do these things, like say you don't do a feature sheet, just remove it. Go in here and delete it. In the event that the subject property is sold within a time period during which the designated representative is unable to render all the services outlined, the parties mutually agree and acknowledge that the brokerage shall be entitled to the full commission, inclusive of HST, in accordance with the terms stipulated in the listing agreement. So basically, that says that if you've decided that you're going to stage this property, you're going to spend $4,000 staging it, and you don't get that done, that's not coming off of the commission. You just didn't get to it, but they still owe the commission. So that is the Schedule A, and it gets initialed here by the listing brokerage and the sellers. This Schedule A is up to you to add or change, but don't change it too much because it's all in here, everything you need. Just have them sign it, and away you go. So that is the listing document. The biggest problem we always see is the part where the commission, total commission in the first part and cooperating commission in the second part. Everything else is pretty straightforward.